The wind moved like breath through the tall grass, carrying the smell of rain and iron. Elias had been following the blood trail since sundown, the print small and desperate, cutting toward the creek. He should have turned back. The sky was bruising black and thunder rolled low as guilt, but something in those tracks pulled him on. When he found the boy, half buried in mud and trembling, he knew this was trouble the size of the plains. No words, just fear in the boy's eyes and a feverish hand clutching a bone-handled knife. Elias lifted him gently, heart hammering. He'd that kind of wound before. A bullet meant to erase a life. And as lightning flared, he wondered who was really being hunted out here. The boy or the man who couldn't walk away. Morning came slow and heavy. Like the world didn't trust the light. Elias woke to silence, the kind that presses on the chest. The boy was still breathing, fever-breaking, eyes flicking beneath his lids as if dreaming of running. Elias stepped outside, boots sinking into wet earth, and stared across the prairie. The world looked clean, but he knew it wasn't. Somewhere out there, someone had shot that boy. And they'd come looking to finish what they started. The scrape of wagon wheels carried from the ridge, a neighbor passing slow, eyes sharp, pretending not to see. Word would travel now. Elias poured water into the trough, pretending to, but his hands shook. He looked at the barn and knew he'd crossed a line he couldn't step back from. Every man in town carried the same story in his mouth, the same hate in his heart, waiting for someone to light the match. Inside the barn, the boy stirred, whispering something in Cheyenne that Elias couldn't understand. He dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to the boy's head. The boy flinched, then still. For a moment, Elias saw his own son, gone these 6 years, and had to look away. Outside, thunder murmured again in the far distance. Trouble never stayed gone for long. By sundown, the sky burned red and quiet. Elias stood by the fence, rifle slung across his shoulder, watching the wind roll through the wheat. He could almost hear her voice, Lena, telling him he'd done right. But right never came without a price. Down the trail, a column of dust rose, riders. He knew then the night would bring fire. The sound of hooves came before the knock, slow, measured, and heavy. Elias stood at the door, jaw tight, knowing exactly who it was. Sheriff Abel Crane had never been a man to waste words, especially when they carried weight like this. The badge caught a glint of sun as he dismounted, dust rising at his boots. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The silence between them held 10 years of friendship, 2 wars, and 1 unspoken truth. Both of them had killed men they never stopped seeing. Crane's voice was calm, but it carried that tone that said he didn't come for coffee. He'd heard. The whole damn town had heard. Crane leaned against the post, thumb hooked through his belt, and spoke like a man who didn't want to say what he had to. He told Elias that folks were talking, that Jed Harlow was stirring things up, saying a savage was hiding in the old barn. Elias didn't answer, just looked out past the sheriff toward the wide, empty fields. The quiet stretched until it hurt. Crane said the words again, slower this time, and asked if it was true. Elias finally turned, eyes tired but steady. "Boy's hurt," he said. "He stays till he's not." The sheriff's gaze drifted toward the barn. For a second, he almost stepped toward it, but something in Elias's face stopped him cold. They'd both worn that look before, the kind that said, "Don't." Crane's jaw worked as he searched for the right words, but all he found was the truth. "You're fixing to make enemies out of good men," he said quietly. Elias shook his head. "There ain't a good man among those who'd hang a boy." The words hung like a knife between them. Crane took a slow breath and stepped back. "You can't save everyone, Eli," he said, voice low, regret heavy in it. Elias looked down, his thumb brushing the edge of his rifle stock, quiet as stone. "Ain't trying to save everyone," he said. Just one. The sheriff mounted his horse, the leather creaking under him, and for a heartbeat, Elias thought he saw pity, or maybe warning, in the man's eyes. The wind carried the faint smell of smoke from town. The day was getting darker by the minute. When Crane rode off, Elias stood alone, watching the dust settle where his friend had been. The stillness pressed against his chest. In the distance, the faint echo of hammering carried from town. Someone building more crosses, more warnings. He walked back toward the barn, slow and steady, the way a man walks toward a storm he can't dodge. Inside, the boy's eyes were open, watching him. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The world outside was already choosing sides. By nightfall, the air in town had gone sour with talk. The saloon buzzed low and mean, like a nest of hornets. Men who'd spent the week cursing the drought now cursed Elias Rourke instead. Jed Harlow sat at the center table, his boots up, whiskey in hand, voice cutting through the noise like a saw through pine. He said a man who'd taken a savage might as well be one. The others laughed, but not for long. When Jed stood, no one dared to keep sitting. The plan was made before the bottle was empty. They'd ride by torchlight and burn the sin out by dawn. Crane stepped outside into the cool night, the noise behind him spilling into the street. He felt it, that low rumble of trouble-growing teeth. He'd kept this town together through drought and hunger, but hate was another kind of hunger, one that never filled. He looked toward the hills, where Elias' lantern would be glowing by now. For the first time, Crane felt the weight of the badge like iron against his chest. He'd either stop what was coming or be buried with it. Elias felt it before he saw it. The silence. Even the crickets had gone quiet. Out on the far ridge, a dozen faint lights shimmered, moving slow and steady like stars that had fallen to earth. He stood by the barn door, rifle at his side, pulse heavy in his throat. The boy stirred in the hay, whispering something sharp and quick in his own tongue. Elias didn't understand the words, but the tone was warning enough. He loaded the rifle, hands steady. If they wanted fire, they'd find it waiting. Back in town, Jed Harlow was saddling his horse, his grin wide and mean under the lamplight. Men gathered around him, faces lit by torches, each one feeding off the other's courage. He barked orders like a man born to lead the wrong kind of cause. "Well, make an example," he said, mounting up. "Ain't no man above the law of his people." The crowd roared in reply, but the sheriff's voice didn't join them. Crane stood back in the shadows, hands tight at his sides, knowing he was about to lose them all to the fire. Elias sat by the boy as the wind picked up again, carrying the faint rumble of hooves. He looked down, saw the fear in the boy's eyes, and something inside him stilled. He reached for the old revolver he'd buried after the war, the metal cold and patient. The sound grew louder, like thunder crawling closer. Outside, firelight flickered across the hills. Elias rose, shoulders squared, the weight of his choices settling heavy and sure. "Stay here," he said softly. "No matter what you hear." The boy didn't answer, just nodded once, eyes burning like coals. The first torch arced through the dark like a comet, spinning end over end before shattering against the side of the barn. The flames hissed up the boards, catching dry straw and splintered wood. Elias didn't move. Not yet. He stood in the doorway, rifle in hand, watching shapes rise out of the black prairie. Faces he knew. Men hand-drunk beside, fought beside. Now, they looked like ghosts lit by their own hate. The boy crouched behind him, breath sharp and quick. The firelight painted Elias's face in streaks of gold and blood red. There was no running now. The night had chosen its side. The fire climbed fast. Elias kicked sand over the sparks, his throat burning from smoke. Outside, Jed's voice cut through the roar, calling him a traitor, daring him to come out and face justice. Elias stepped forward into the doorway, rifle raised, voice steady as stone. "You call that justice?" he shouted. "That boy's worth more than the lot of you put together." The crowd flinched, unsure. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then someone shouted, "Light it all." And the torches came again. Then the wind shifted. The smoke bent back toward the mob, blinding them. Elias ducked low, dragging a wet tarp over the boy as sparks rained down. For a heartbeat, he thought this was how it'd end. The barn burning, both of them swallowed in light. But then came a sound that didn't belong to the storm or the fire. The low roll of hooves, hundreds strong, echoing across the plains. The men outside froze. Elias looked past the flames and saw the horizon blooming with light. Not dawn, not lightning, but torches. Hundreds of them. The mob stumbled back, panic cracking their courage apart. Torches wavered. Some men dropped theirs. Some whispered prayers. Jed's mouth hung open, disbelief painting his face pale in the firelight. From the ridge, the Cheyenne moved like a river of flame. Silent, endless, unstoppable. The air trembled with the thunder of hooves. Elias stepped out from the barn, rifle lowered but ready. He wasn't their enemy. Not tonight. The settlers turned toward their leader, but Jed's face said it all. There was no turning back, and then came the silence before the charge, that hollow space where the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. The Cheyenne stopped short, lined like a wall of fire along the ridge. One rider dismounted and walked forward, torch in hand. The mob parted, fear hollowing their hearts. Elias knew that face. Chief Matse, older now but unmistakable. The chief raised his torch high, eyes fixed on Elias. The mob behind Jed began to tremble, their leader's voice gone dry. The night, once burning with hatred, now belonged to something far greater, something that no man's fire could match. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The mob stood frozen beneath a wall of fire that stretched across the horizon. 400 torches flickering like stars torn from the heavens. The horses pawed and snorted, nervous beneath trembling hands. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, his eyes fixed on the man at the front. Chief Matse didn't shout or wave his weapon. He just stood, tall and silent, his torch held high against the wind. Elias remembered that face from another war, another field, when he'd chosen mercy instead of blood. Now that same mercy had come back, fierce as thunder, and twice as bright. The chief spoke first, not to the mob, not to Elias, but to the sky itself. His words rolled low and deep, carried by the wind, a song older than the dirt beneath their boots. Elias didn't understand the language, but he knew its meaning. Remembrance, fire, debt, and justice. The mob shifted uneasily, rifles lowering one by one. Jed tried to rally them, shouting that the Cheyenne would kill them all, but his voice cracked under the weight of 400 stares. Elias stepped forward, and for the first time that night, every man turned to listen. Elias's voice broke through the tension like a crack of dry wood. He told them about the boy, about mercy, about right and wrong when no one's watching. He spoke of Lena, of how she died nursing the sick when others turned them away. "I buried my gun after the war," he said, "and I swore I'd never pick it up again unless the world went mad." He lifted the rifle, not in anger, but in proof. "Looks like it has." The crowd stood still, shame creeping through their faces. Jed's hand twitched toward his pistol, but even he seemed small under the weight of that light. Then one shot cracked through the night. No one could tell who fired first. The bullet tore through the smoke, shattering the moment like glass. Horses screamed, men shouted, and chaos erupted. Elias ducked low, grabbing the boy and dragging him behind the fence. Fire spilled across the yard as torches fell. The mob scattered, firing blindly, but the Cheyenne didn't rush. They moved like wind and flame, surrounding the men without a word. By the time the smoke cleared, The guns were silent, and only groans and crackling fire remained. When it was done, the night fell quiet again. The fire had eaten half the field, but the barn still stood, blackened but standing, like an old soldier refusing to fall. The wounded were being gathered, both white and Cheyenne. Elias sat beside the boy, his hands shaking from more than smoke. Chief Matse approached, his torch burned low, eyes heavy with memory. He placed a hand on Elias' shoulder, a gesture of peace older than language. Around them, the last torches guttered out, and for the first time in years, the stars began to show through the smoke. Dawn crawled slow across the scarred prairie, spilling pale light over what was left of the night. The mob was broken, rifles tossed, pride gone quiet. Elias stood in the middle of it all, ash clinging to his hair, eyes fixed on the man who'd started it. Jed Harlow knelt by his horse, the fight drained clean out of him. "You done?" Elias asked softly. Jed didn't answer. Behind them, the Cheyenne gathered their wounded, moving with a kind of still grace that shamed the silence. The war everyone feared had ended before it began, but something deeper still had to be settled. Sheriff Crane arrived just after sunrise, the sound of his horse echoing across the burned field. He dismounted slow, his boots sinking into the wet ash. His badge caught a stray glint of morning light, dull, tarnished, like the man himself. He took in the scene. Men had sworn to protect lying wounded, smoke curling from the barn, and Elias standing like a ghost among them. For a long while, he said nothing. Then, quietly, he asked, "Who fired first?" The question hung there, but no one spoke. Maybe it didn't matter anymore. Jed tried to speak. Some broken string of excuses, but the words came out weak, hollow, full of the same hate that had already burned itself to ashes. "You brought this on us," he rasped. Elias looked at him, and the years of bitterness in that stare could have split a stone. "No," Elias said quietly. "You did." He turned to Crane then, voice trembling but sure. "You can hang me if it helps the town sleep. You can hang me if it helps the town sleep. But you tell them who threw the first torch." The sheriff's jaw worked tight. For once, he didn't reach for his badge. Chief Matse stepped forward, silent until now. He spoke in English this time, his voice slow and clear. "This land remembers," he said, looking between Elias and the sheriff. "Every stone, every tree. It remembers what's been taken and what's been given back." His gaze fell to Jed, who couldn't meet it. "Justice has already come." With that, he turned toward his people, raising his hand in quiet signal. One by one, the warriors began to move out, their torches gone, their silhouettes fading into the morning fog like spirits returning to the earth. When the last rider vanished over the ridge, the prairie fell quiet again. Only the wind spoke, whispering through the burnt grass. Elias walked back to the barn, each step heavy but sure. Inside, the boy slept. His fever gone, his breath steady. For the first time since the war, Elias felt the weight in his chest lift, just a little. He looked toward the doorway, where the sunlight poured in soft and clean, and whispered, "You're safe now." Outside, the sheriff mounted his horse without a word. The law had nothing left to say. The sun rose over a land that looked both wounded and reborn. The smoke had drifted west, and the fields glowed pale gold beneath the new light. Elias walked the fence line slowly, boots crunching through ash and dew, every breath carrying the smell of rain and burnt wood. The barn still stood, blackened but proud, like an old heart that refused to quit. Behind him, the boy's soft footsteps followed, weaker now but steady. Neither spoke. The world didn't need words that morning. It only needed silence. The kind that comes after the storm has said everything it can. By the time the sheriff rode up, the air was clean again. He dismounted slow. No badge glinting now. Just a man with tired eyes, and the look of someone who's seen too much to pretend anymore. Elias nodded once, No anger, no forgiveness, just a quiet understanding. Crane said the town would mend its fences, pay for what it broke, maybe even try to sleep again. Elias said nothing, because words don't fix what conscience can't. The boy stepped forward then, holding the old revolver Elias had buried years ago. He handed it back to him, and the gesture said more than mercy ever could. By noon, the Cheyenne were ready to move. Chief Matse came last, his presence as steady as the earth itself. He looked at Elias, then at the boy, and gave a single nod. It was the kind of nod men give when a debt is repaid and the ledger finally balanced. No ceremony, no speeches, just understanding. The chief turned his horse toward the horizon, and the warriors followed, their torches long gone, replaced by feathers that caught the wind. Elias watched them until the last one vanished into the heat shimmer. The plains felt wider somehow, freer, maybe, or just less cruel. When the dust settled, Elias and the boy stood alone in the quiet yard. The land looked raw but alive, scorched black against the rolling gold of the distance. Elias turned to the barn, his hands brushing its charred boards, feeling the warmth still trapped inside. "She's held together," he murmured, half to himself. The boy smiled faintly. A small, weary thing, but real. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried out, cutting through the stillness. For the first time in years, Elias looked up at the sky and didn't feel judged. That evening, when the sun sank low and the crickets began again, Elias sat by the fence with the boy beside him. The land was quiet, the kind of quiet that forgives. Smoke no longer lingered, only the smell of earth after rain. He thought of Lena, of all the things he'd lost, and all the things he'd still managed to keep. A name, a soul, a piece of right in a world that had nearly burned it out. The boy leaned against the post, eyes closing in peace. Elias looked out over the plains, whispering to no one, "The fire's done its work."